Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. As you can see, I have all these beautiful watercolor swatches out in front of us, and you know what that means? I finally put together my granulating watercolor palette. Now, I had set myself a challenge of figuring out how to make myself a super granulating watercolor palette using what I already have, because the Want Monster has really been after me lately because there's all these gorgeous super granulating watercolor sets that have been released. Schmincke has like 4 of them. There's a Supervision set that has dual colors that I'm really interested in, and they also have a pan set that looks pretty good. And there has just been a lot of paint lately with beautiful textures that I think are just absolutely gorgeous. Now, the reason I fell in love with watercolor, I've been painting in watercolor since I was 7. And the reason I loved watercolor more than any other type of paint was that every color seemed to have its own personality. Now, there did seem to be a shift away from that in, I would say, the 90s, where companies or painters wanted more of a smooth, consistent paint with no texture. And some companies do that very well, and that's beautiful, and that's what you like, then awesome. But I loved that I could use my palette of watercolors, and if I wanted a moody sky, I could use ultramarine blue and burnt sienna and get this gorgeous texture. And if I wanted something clean and crisp, I could use a quinacridone and mix with a cyan color and have a gorgeous smooth effect like that. And I just loved how every color had its own personality. So, especially when I switched over into professional range from like Cotman, what I painted with when I was younger. So for me, finding paints that actually have more of a granulation effect, I think are extremely fun and exciting, and I just like it. So this is a palette I ended up making, and we'll go into the colors in just a second. I was debating what I wanted to do. So I posted on Instagram, and I got a whole bunch of different answers, but I said, do I pull pans out of different sets that I've already poured? Because most of these colors I already have in watercolor sets, because when I buy a tube of paint, I make a pan or I put it in a well in a palette and I use it. And then I put the tube in my storage drawer. So it's like, well, I could go through and I could pull pans together into a new tin, but I didn't like the thought of that, because then I thought, well, it's like removing a child from its family, you know, that just feels wrong to take a color out of a tin and put it somewhere else. I don't know. It's probably foolish. It's probably, I don't know, it's probably crazy, but I just didn't, I didn't like that thought. I didn't like that idea. Plus, when I'm comparing like a new set of paints to an old set of paints, sometimes I want to compare a full tin, and I like to keep them stored together. I know it's silly when I store all my tubes by color and not by manufacturer, but anyway, so I decided that wasn't the solution for me. And then I thought, well, I could just find all my colors that granulate and put them in a palette. Then I realized I have way more colors that granulate, because a lot of colors that are inorganic will have subtle granulation properties. And I didn't want just the run-of-the-mill subtle granulating colors. I wanted the ones that were more unusual, or maybe ones that I never use, but I would for backgrounds and stuff like that. So I wanted it to be very versatile, and I wanted it to not duplicate what I already had going on, but a palette that I could pull out with any other palette I had and make it more useful and more fun. And then the final criteria, which I realized yesterday as I was weeding down the colors, is I want to only use 2 colors that I have in tubes. That way I don't have to have a palette that will accommodate pans and tubes. And plus, I really wanted to put them in a well like this so I could get a big brush in and I could really mix up a good amount of color. Like I could add water to that and agitate it and get a good puddle of color to put on my paper, because probably what I'll end up doing is putting in the color on its own and then letting the colors mix on the paper, and then on a really wet wash, and then leaving it be to settle out to get that gorgeous texture. And we'll go into this video, we'll go into ways to get more granulation from the paints you have, what properties will make better granulation in paper and paints, and whatnot. I have no idea how long this video will be, but feel free to pause and take notes if you want to, because it'll probably be a lot of different information. And if you're setting up your very own granulation palettes with what you have, chances are your paints are going to be different than mine, and that's fine, because I'm going to show you how to hunt out those different qualities. So this is what I used for a palette, because this would accommodate the amount of colors I had and wanted to use with a few extra spaces. I wanted to use like a kind of a self-contained lidded palette, but I didn't have one. That's the other thing. I didn't want to buy anything new. So I had these $2 palettes from Ocean State Job Lot that I really like, but they just weren't, this was only 16 colors, and I worried that I wasn't going to have enough space to pull color out and mix. So this, unfortunately, not going to be used for this, but I had this from an old set of watercolors that I had used up, and actually I'd used this for gouache, but I didn't like it for gouache because it dried out. I originally didn't want to use this because I didn't have a lid, but then I realized it fits perfectly in my Pike palette and my M-Gram, the Jones palette I have my M-Gram paints in, and I can lid it right up so that will keep the dust off it. Plus, the other thing with this palette, I'm not going to use this on its own. I'm going to use this with other colors. Obviously, I wouldn't use all the colors together. I would pick a few colors and add it with a normal watercolor palette. So I could set this next to a tin on my table, or I could set it right in the middle of my Jones or Pike palette and have plenty of room for mixing. Or if I have to lift it out and set it aside, that's fine too, once I got that background wash in. So that's why I'm using this. And you know, you may find it's a better idea to use a tin with full pans or a tin with half pans if you don't work very large or you don't want to do big washes. It's completely up to you. You know, I might decide to add a few half pans in here in the future. It's whatever is going to meet your needs. Since I do like to keep manufacturers together, if I did end up purchasing the Supervision colors, I might put them in a tin by themselves. I don't know, but this is going to suit me for now, and I'm pretty happy with it. And let's talk about the colors that I chose. So I'm just going to set this lid back on. I will let these dry out and spray them before I use them, because a lot of times your granulating colors can be a little difficult to re-wet. So I would recommend that you know, before you go to use them. So I'm going to talk about the pigments that I chose, and keep in mind, this is a use what you have palette for me, and there may be recommendations that I would recommend different. If I was to say, if you're going to do this, get this brand instead of this brand, because there are some certain pigments here that I'm thinking, oh, I wish I had that in Lukas, or I wish I had that in Winsor Newton, or I wish I had that in Daniel Smith, but I don't. So, so if you want to take notes, if you want to, you know, if there's something you're interested in, then I'll hope to discuss it. So I thought it'd be fun, as I was just kind of, I was just very all over the place as I was doing my research, but I was thinking, I really love that rose ash color by Supervision, and I'm like, I wonder if I can make that. So I took Cobalt Teal from Daniel Smith and Paul Rubens Madder Red, so PB36 and PR177, mixed them up, swashed it out and let it sit, and I got a good dupe of rose ash. And I think you could use those in any brands, quite frankly, and you would get a very similar result. I did a few others. I was using front and back, so you know, different papers will give you different results. Some will give you very granulated results and some won't. So keep that in mind. I had one that was like their green red, but I can't find it. I don't see that swatch right now. Oh, there we go. The Cobalt Green PG50 and Madder Red PR177 made very much like their green red color. You could also use a violet if you wanted more of a purple green, because the colors split apart pretty well. This was, I think, on the wrong side of the paper, so it didn't granulate quite as well. So you might be wondering, how come I see some artists use the same paint that I have, but they get a beautiful granulating effect, and mine is not. Mine is barely granulating. And it's probably due to the paper they're using. They probably have a heavier sized paper. It could also be that their water is softer than yours. So I live in the country and I have a well, and our water is hard. So we use a water softener, which is a big machine, I guess I would call it, that you put these salt pellets in, and your water's not salty when it comes out of the tap. It's like a purifier, and it softens the water. But even so, our water is not as soft as like my mother has a well, and their water is very soft. If you take a shower, like the water feels soft. If you do laundry or you wash dishes, the suds just bubble up like crazy. That's a much softer water. I would get more granulation in my paints if I use that water. You could add you could add salt to your water to get more granulation. You could add well, that would be a good thing. Just add some salt to your mixing water and get some more granulation that way if you find that you're not getting what you want. And also just working on a harder size paper will help you as well. So that's something that you might want to consider if you're finding that you're using the same paints that other people are using and you're just not getting the granulation. So how I decided what colors I was going to use was two things. For one, I swatched a lot of my tube paints, and I swatched them in big, wet, juicy swatches, because I found that the swatches inside my tins were not adequate to determine whether a color was going to granulate or not, because I was inconsistent with the paper, some of the papers that I used on my swatches, and also I wasn't doing really wet swatches because I was just trying to get an overall color map of what I had, and those little swatches, you know, did not sit wet long enough. I might have used a heat tool to dry them because I was just trying to get them done. And so it wasn't a very good representation, and you need kind of a big swatch. So what was actually better for me, and I'm going to reach under my table and grab it, was my big swatch binder, because I generally do larger swatches when I swatch out paints in my swatch binder here. So after I had swatched out a bunch of individual tubes that I thought would probably granulate, then I had to look through my swatch binder to see if any brands, certain pigments in any brand, granulated better than others. So I'm just going to go through here and just kind of give you an idea. So see how these larger swatches, they're more likely to show you how a paint's going to look. It's like this one, these are my Phoenix watercolors, and I realized that Phoenix and Cadmium are, they use the same pigment codes. I think they're the same exact paint. And I noticed their raw sienna granulated there. And luckily I had actually had an old version of raw sienna from Cadmium, and that's how I chose that color. Oh, oddly enough, some of these are, there's a couple of the Art Whale watercolors that granulate pretty well. Ultramarine Deep and Cobalt Blue. I didn't end up using them because I had a different blue that I wanted to use. Those are just notes. I make and save notes. I print, if I see something interesting online, I print it out and I throw it in there. Now, Lukas actually has some really interesting granulating colors. Unfortunately, all my Lukas paints were in pans, even some open stock ones, so I couldn't include them, but I would consider, I'd probably purchase some of the tubes, and their tubes are a huge value. They're like 24 ml, and they're usually between like $9 and $14, and their half pans are like, they were on sale at Jerry's for like $3.55 to $6.55, so they're a really good value. These now, so some brands have no granulation, like these from Mikador have absolutely no granulation. They're completely smooth, and they're just super, super crisp and smooth, almost like ink. So, you know, that's why it's important to swatch things. So I look at my big M Gram swatch. So this is laid out the way my Jones palette is with my M Gram watercolors. I can look through, and I was like, oh no, my Viridian from M Gram doesn't seem to granulate that much. So I ended up doing a bigger swatch of the Viridian, and I think I might have actually had a couple different paints in that pan, and I think it was throwing me off because I was getting a nice granulation from my M Gram Viridian on different paper. But looking through here, I could see that the Van Dyke Brown granulated really nice, and the Burnt Umber and Burnt Sienna had some granulation to it. So, and the Cerulean Blue had some granulation to it, but I found the M Grams didn't have the super intense granulation that some other brands had. They're nice. They all have a little bit of a different texture to them. Like Cobalt Blue has some granulation, so does Ultramarine. But I'm kind of precious about the M Gram, and I have a full palette set up with them, so I was okay not really using much from the M Gram. I only use Viridian from M Gram. Sennelier, virtually no granulation on their colors. So that's important to know, because if you're a painter and you don't want that granulation, you can be, you know, fairly certain that if you bought a color in even ultramarine blue, if you purchase it from Sennelier, it's going to have less granulation. It's fine. It's more finely milled for a smoother effect. So that can affect granulation, how finely or smoothly a company mills their paints. Now this here, that is Turner, I'm pretty sure, right there, from the 18 set. And looking here, I can see their Mayan Red actually had some lovely granulation to it. Their Mayan Blue had some lovely granulation. It looks like their Mayan Yellow might have had a little bit of granulation to it. Their Burnt Umber has a little bit of granulation to it. Their Turquoise, PB28 Cobalt Turquoise, but it's a different pigment from the other turquoises that I have, has a lovely granulation to it. So, but just by going through here, I can see what I have and how they're granulating. Now these, look at this Lukas Ultramarine Deep, gorgeously granulating. The Caput Mortuum has a great granulation due to the fact that it contains PBK11 and PR101, both granulating colors. PR101 can be a little, it can granulate more in some paints and less in others, but PBK11 always granulates. I only have that in a pan though, so I couldn't add that to this set, but next time I'm using my Lukas 48 set, I'm going to have that in my mind. Also, their Verona Green granulates beautifully. Their Cobalt Turquoise granulates beautifully. Their Oxide of Chromium actually granulates pretty well. And even though it doesn't show it here, their Cobalt Green granulates fairly well. So just having a bigger, wetter swatch does help in determining. Now their Viridian does granulate all right, although apparently my swatch of Viridian here, it was from a pan. And it was not in this set. I think I put it in, it's in my Turner box. Also, it did granulate not as well as the M Gram, ironically. And these are Renesans pans, and I noticed their cerulean pan granulated nicer than their cerulean in the tube. So going through your swatches can really help you determine A, what brands tend to granulate more than others, and B, what colors within the brands granulate better. So it helped me select like what burnt umber that I want to use. Like ironically, the burnt umber that I wanted to use was from a brand that I really didn't care for that much. And if I go through, I think it's the Kusakabe, the Neo watercolors from Kusakabe. I didn't really like those paints that much, but I noticed that their burnt umber granulated beautifully, so I went with that. But anyway, so that's another reason why it's just a great idea to keep that swatch binder. I know it can feel kind of like a daunting task if you have a bunch of paint already, but if you don't and you just kind of swatch as you go, then it's not that big of a deal, and it's a great way to get to know your colors. So we're going to go through and talk about each color that I used. And this is probably going to be extremely boring for some people, but hopefully not. I'm going to zoom in a little bit too, so hopefully this shows up really well for you. So we're going to start on the back row of the palette. I tried to kind of group my colors together a little bit, and I left spaces where I thought, like if I wanted to add another purple or a blue, like say decided I wanted an ultramarine. I can't imagine I would, because every palette I own pretty much, any palette I've put together has an ultramarine blue in it because I use it more often than any other color. And I thought, well, if I can find another yellow that I want to add, like if I want to, I don't think I have any Turner Mayan yellow left, but if I did, I could add that in there. I thought about using a Cerulean because that's a cobalt yellow, but I didn't really see any granulation with that. Generally, your cobalt colors are safe bets when you're looking for granulating colors. And I left a space over in the black and the brown in case I wanted to add like a Daniel Smith Lunar Black, or if I wanted to, because I don't have that in a tube. I have sodalite in a stick, but I didn't want to put sticks in here, so I might get a tube of that because I really like it. Okay, so starting here in the back corner, I have ultramarine violet. This is by Renesans, and it has a gorgeous splitting effect, and I can show you that on the I have a swatch of that I did on, good grief, on the right here, Durfee. I have a swatch on the Legion Stonehenge Aqua there. This is on the agave paper by Hahnemühle, and then here, I'll just unclip this and so your side by side is on 100% cotton, 100% cotton Hahnemühle Cezanne, which is a fairly good sizing. It's very similar to arches, so that if you have arches, it'll look a little bit more like that. Keep in mind on these smaller swatches, I couldn't really soak the paper like I could on the agave paper just because it was larger. Next one, we have Lavender Violet. This is Paul Rubens, and it was from the it was just one of their tubes that I had from the floral set that they released. Gorgeous color. I love how you get these very undertones of pink splitting out. PB29. Oh, so this one is PV16 and PB29. It's a mix. This one is PB29, PV3, and PW6. So it does contain a white. By the way, your white can granulate a bit, but I think it gives it more of a chalky appearance, so I didn't like put a white in this palette or put a buff titanium in this palette for that reason, but you could. A lot of people like to add the buff titanium for granulation. Now this one here is the most granulating warm blue that I had, which is Schmincke's Cobalt Blue Deep. It is a mix of PB8, which is your customary cobalt blue, plus PB74, which is another cobalt blue pigment. Gorgeous, gorgeous splitting on this agave paper. And this is also, you probably get a similar effect from any cellulose paper, I think. Might puddle a little bit more, but yeah, any hard size paper, cellulose paper, should give you a similar effect. And this is it on the cotton paper, still a gorgeous texture. I thought it was real. And these were wetter washes on the agave paper too. Now I have a White Knight's Cerulean Blue PB35 on the agave and on the cotton. And I wanted to add a cerulean, and I didn't even have any M-gram cerulean in the tube. I had used that up. All I have is what's on my palette, and I don't use it that often, so I probably won't rebuy. But I did have a tube of the White Knights, and honestly, I didn't care for their paints in the tube as much as a pan. I also have a pan of this, but it's gonna work out fine. It's gonna work out fine here. Here I have Core Cobalt Turquoise PB36. At first I was disappointed in this color because I thought it would be more like Cobalt Teal, which I really liked. But it's a gorgeous granulating color, and it works really great in those specialty super granulating mixes. You can mix it with a dye color because it splits apart and it's got such a unique, gorgeous undertone. Then we have the core Cobalt Teal, PG50. So that's PB36, Pigment Blue 36. This is PG50, Pigment Blue 50. This is available in a lot of different brands. They all granulate beautifully, but I would say my core granulates a little bit more than my Daniel Smith, so I went with that. Now I have M-Gram's Viridian, that's PG18. M-Gram has one of the most easy to reactivate Viridians that I've ever used, especially going from tube to dry. So that's one of the reasons I went with that. I did have Viridian from a couple other brands, but they could be a little tricky to re-wet, so I just went with the M-Gram for the ease of use. Less granulation on the cotton paper. So that's just something I'll have to make sure I use it in a really juicy wash to get the effect. This is Renesans Cobalt Green Pale, which gave me some beautiful granulation. I think Lukas, I would go with Lukas if you want to buy this color. I think it'll be about the same price, but you'll get more. And the thing with some of these Renesans colors, especially using them wet and not letting them dry down, there's so much honey in them that it's almost goopy and gloopy, and it really hinders the paint moving. And I don't notice it being as gloopy when I use it from a dried pan. So you could either buy that from Renesans in the pan, or you could buy it from Lukas. I think the Lukas granulates a little bit more, and I didn't see much granulation on the cotton paper, but then again, probably just need to use it in a much wetter wash. And I used the Kusakabe oxide of chromium, PG17, and also I think that the Lukas oxide of chromium granulates better, but I didn't have that in a tube. So for these two greens, actually, if you get the pan Viridian, I can't vouch for the tube, but the pan Viridian from Lukas rewets really well. So I'm going to say for these three colors, get them in Lukas. They'll be cheaper, and I think they'll perform a little bit better, but I'm using what I have. Now over here, I have, finding a granulating yellow is a little bit tricky. So I went to my swatches, and my raw sienna from Cadmium had a good granulation. That's a mix of PY42 and PR101. And it's a PR101, I believe, giving it the granulation. Although PY42 is a natural yellow, and I do believe that Goethite from Daniel Smith is also PY42, and that is extremely granulating. So I'm assuming they don't grind the pigments as finely. So that's one I would like to add, maybe into this slot or into that slot. I don't have it. Goethite. I think it's Goethite. I also used Cadmium Nickel Titanate Yellow, which is PY53. I think it's, well, they don't make that anymore in Cadmium, so you'd have to get that in another brand. But it's a very weak lemon yellow color, and not super, well, it does granulate on its own, but it's hard to see because the value contrast isn't enough with the paper. But you can use it in mixes like I did here in these two mixes to get some granulating yellow effects. So here I used that with the raw sienna and a touch of cad red, which was so overpowering. I put a little potter's pink in there too to tone it down. So you can use it in a yellow mix where you want some granulation, or you can add it into some blue mixes to get like a little bit of a seafoamy green granulating effect. I don't know if that's going to focus, but hopefully you can see that. I will take photos of these and pop them on Instagram so you can take a peek. Okay, let's move down into our browns since we're right here. I've got a Renesans Van Dyke Brown. This is PB15:3, so that is what you would know as phthalo blue. PR48:4. It's not as common red color. I don't see that very often. PR101, which is another neutral earthy red, iron oxide red. And then PBK11, which is our very granulating magnetic black. So I love this on the cotton. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous color on the cotton, gorgeous texture, and pretty good on this as well. And then we've got our Burnt Umber, Kusakabe, PBR7. And for whatever reason, their Burnt Umber granulated far better than any other brand that I had. And looks fantastic on the cotton as well. I think different companies will use different forms of milling. Some may grind them more, some may grind them less, and that's why you get different effects. Mars Black, PBK11. I think I will, once I use up the Renesans, I will use Daniel Smith Lunar Black when I use that up. And there it is on the cotton. I think it looks prettier on the cotton. Here we have Perylene Violet from Renesans, which is a hue, PR101, and PB60, which is known as Indothrone Blue. And it's just a cool black with a little bit of texture. Not super texture, but I felt like I needed a cooler black here in this palette. Now, if we're going to scoot over onto the red side, I've got Potter's Pink. This I would not recommend getting in Renesans. I would get it in Winsor Newton. and I would get a pan, and that advice comes from Kim Crick, who says the pans rewet like a dream, and this is a very difficult to rewet color. And also because of the honey and the Renaissance paint, I've got a real glossy sheen. I probably would end up sticking some gold leaf on backgrounds I do that has the glossy sheen, because I think it would be a very interesting effect and textural and just gorgeous. But if I had to do it again, I'm going to get the Winsor Newton pan, and hopefully a full pan, because it will rewet. They change a formulation on, well, they've always said they change a formulation between pan and tube to make them easier to rewet, but for colors like this, I think it would actually be true. And then I use cadmium red. I use Core PR108, and I used too much paint here because I was trying to clean out the cap and not waste, but I got too much. But here on the cotton, you can see the beautiful subtle granulation in the cad red. It's never a huge granulation, but it does give you some subtle effects that are pretty. And then I've got Bordeaux, cadmium Bordeaux from Renesans. This is PR108. Also, just like the cad red, but it must be burnt or treated differently to get that bloody red color and gorgeous texture. I would recommend that in Renesans because they are very affordable, especially for cadmium colors. Then I've got Manganese Violet from Renesans, PV16. I really like it. I would recommend it from Renesans. And I've got Core's Cobalt Violet, PV49. I don't know if I'd recommend, I like this color, but it's very hard to rewet, so I think I'd recommend getting this from a pan. From another, I think Lukas actually has that in a pan, so that might be a better option because it would be cheaper and it would be all ready to go and ready to rewet. But that's my color assortment that I have here, and I just kind of did some wet washes to just see how they mixed and worked. I was really happy with that, and I tried it on Montville paper, some of these greens that I was trying to decide about, and look at that, isn't that gorgeous? So pretty, especially the purples. And there's one other thing I want to show you before we sign off today, and that is ways to force granulation in other colors. So here I took cheap colors. These are the Paul Rubens student tubes. And here I just did ultramarine on its own. Here I used granulation medium and Winsor Newton granulation medium. Didn't really do much. Here I used just the rose on its own. There I added granulation medium. I got a little texture, but nothing to write home about. Here I sprayed alcohol on the ultramarine blue. Great texture, great texture. And here I used with the I put some granulation medium in a spray bottle, sprayed it on, nothing to write home about. Here I painted a strip of water with salt water first, then added the blue, and that gave me amazing granulation. So use salt water if you want to get better granulation. I did that with the rose too. It enhanced the color. It didn't necessarily give me texture, but it did give me a more bold color, and I think that's just mainly because I softened my water, having a harder water to start with. And this is just kind of a dupe of Rose of Ultramarine by adding ultramarine and permanent rose, or rose, yeah, permanent rose together, Quinn Rose, and I got that gorgeous splitty color there. So you can definitely use what you have, test your paints, even if you have some inexpensive student paints. Some brands are going to work just fine, and these are, again, I just kept like swatching on pages that I didn't really need for anything else. So yeah, this book, I left this out in the rain when I was painting at camp, and ruined a bunch of the papers for painting, so I'm just using our swatches now. But there you have it. I hope you found this useful. I hope you give it a try with the paints you already have. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this, please give me a thumbs up, and it'll encourage me. It'll encourage me. Don't you want to encourage me? Maybe not. I don't know. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.